My bunch of buddies and I had always dreamt of making a trip to Vietnam. It was something that we had been looking forward to ever since we saw Good Morning Vietnam the first time. We had planned on a road trip in Vietnam, and we had been planning it for years now, and just trying to come up with a mutual time to go. And getting out of school and going to college, we were really excited to meet together once again after a long time after college. We decided to do it before we all get involved with our careers and stuff, and before that, we needed to complete this trip. We were all planning ahead, getting everything ready, our finances, itinerary, and everything that we needed must before the trip. And there was even contacted one of our friends, Rebecca Tran. She was the Vietnamese foreign exchange student that we hosted in our school, and she became our friend back then, and she was in on the trip and wanted to be the one to show us around. We were making plans for the trip, and then we decided the road trip will start from Hanoi and go anywhere it can be. The first thing was getting good money on the flights, and we got the flight in Vietjet Airlines. The Vietjet Airlines was one of my friend's choice, and he said it's good, and the hostess in there was pretty, so service is going to be great. We decided that we make sure that our friend was in control, because last thing we need was a menace in the plane trying to make things worse. We boarded the flight on the Monday from the JFK airport, and my friend was already buzzed, and we were worried that he might start something up mid-air, and we were already ready to handle things in case they go south, because we had this feeling that things will definitely go south. With him, things always go wrong. As soon as we get onto the plane, we slipped a sleeping pill in his drink in order to make sleep like a horse during the journey. We all were sitting in our respectable seats when the hostess came and asked us for the drinks, and we all accepted them. Then, one of them came closer to me and asked them if I would like to drink. I told him sure, and then she said for that I will have to come with her. I know what was happening, and I agreed and started walking with her. And then as I was following her, my friends commented inappropriate things that she completely ignored with laughs. And as I went through the door, she took me straight to the cockpit, and I was sure about why she was going there. And she opened the door for the cockpit, and there it was, the pilot. But beside the pilot, there was a man in a Hawaiian shirt with a gun pointed over the pilot's head. And then the shock came to me as I realized that the plane was getting hijacked. But I thought, what does this have to do with me? So I was standing there, and I was scared and clueless. And then the guy told me, "Hey kid, everybody out there don't know it yet. This plane has got hijacked, and you have to announce it. White guy doing it would be better and take this beautiful hostess with you." I just couldn't understand what was happening. And then he said, "I don't want to freak out people as if you don't do it. I have a man who's in the passenger seat and undercover. If you don't do it, we open fire. Most of you die, or everybody dies. Your choice, kid." And I was left with that choice. And I was puzzled out of options, knowing when I had to do it no matter what. As I got out, my friends saw me getting out of the plane with the air hostess by my side, and they were smirking, thinking that I hit it off with that hot-looking Vietnamese air hostess, and I just tried my best not to make eye contact with them. And I get in front of everybody and tried to canvass the guy who could be the possible shooter. Now this was something that happened before the World Trade Center, so the security wasn't as tight as it used to be with the airplanes. And now that I was out and about to do the announcement, my eyes just kept on trying to locate the other man, but it wasn't helpful. I then announced, "Everybody, please listen. I have a message from you all, from a special man in the cockpit." I was reading the lines as he gave me. "Things will be smooth for you all if you act the way you are right now, quiet and calm. If you panic, it could be troublesome. This plane is under the control of a couple of hijack-doing duo, so in case you have to make it safe, be calm and cooperate. Pull out all the money due you have and dump it into the bag. My beautiful friend over here will come to your seats, and you have to drop whatever money you have in the bag, and don't act smart. One of my friends has a bomb, and he's quietly sitting between you guys. Act up, and he let go, and we all become barbecue in the air. Give the money, and smile back, and I will be out here without being a problem, a massive problem." The air hostess started walking asking for the money, and people were dumping the money in the bag. And when they reached my friends, they dropped the cash too, and she collected all the cash. While she was doing that, I realized something. He said that his friend had a gun, yet the script he gave me said it had a bomb. There was something missing about him, and I just felt like he wasn't as dangerous as he was claiming to be. I signaled the air hostess to stay back with the crew, and took the bag from her and went inside the cockpit. And as I did, the man was pointing the gun at the pilot, and I said, "Here's the money. Now call your man to drop his knife." And he said, "Don't worry, he will not stab anybody." And I said, "You dropped your magazine down, man." And the man quickly out of focus said, "It doesn't have it. It's a prop, dude." And they all looked at the man. The pilot, me, and the co-pilot just looked at the man. "There's no friend, is there?" And the man just said in disappointment, "No." And we just looked at the man. I had the bag in my hand. I took the gun out of his hand and then told him to just get outside and wait. And we sat through the flight where he said he was inspired to do it from Clark Olsen from Norway. The flight lands and the police come in before anybody could get off the plane. And instead of arresting the man, they arrested me. It's not their fault. I was holding the fake gun in the cash bag. I did this to myself. Well, the pilot cleared things up and then I was let go. My friend woke up and asked what happened. We told him, and he was glad it wasn't him this time who caused the trouble. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. It all started on the last day of school, when we said each other goodbyes and started walking back to our houses. It was a cold winter afternoon, and the roads were packed with fresh snow, and through the streams of students walking by, you can hear a thud of someone falling at regular intervals. Our black leather shoes were just not made for the snow. The regular thuds and the giggles as everyone would take a fall, and I was giggling when my friend fell. I was the next one, and as I fell, I took my other friend with me, and down we did go. We got up, dusted the pants, and me and my friend who fell took the normal route, while another friend of ours took the different routes, but we exchanged the backpacks, as ours was heavier and they were going to take a shortcut. They took our bags and we took theirs, just to even things out, and we started walking. We were at the famous square point when a car took a one-way turn and approached us from behind. We had no idea of this happening, and we were busy talking and making our way back to our dorms. Suddenly, I felt a hand grabbing me from behind. For split seconds, I thought it was someone I knew. I looked back. They were strangers. And there, in split seconds, I made the decision and let my friend's bag go and started running, and so did my friend. The passerby tried to intervene, but they fired shots in the air, and as they did, everyone made their way and dispersed, and we stopped right where we were. And I could see it was my friend. He was down. The bullet that they allegedly shot in fire must have ricocheted and hit him slightly and is cutting it. He was screaming in pain, and I was hiding behind the square bunch when they approached my friend. And as they did, I thought they might hurt him, so I got out. They slapped my friend and picked me up and dropped me in the car and headed to a secluded location. After a while, they decided to ask me to write a letter to my parents, telling them how I've been kidnapped, and they said they would deliver it to my house. They asked me to add their number to have a chat, so I wrote the letter, and then, without asking me the address, went on to deliver it. And then they waited. They never showed me their face. I told them I was angry, and they did arrange some pizza and Coca-Cola for me. They waited for 2 days, and there was no response. They thought the address they used was wrong, and they decided to cross-check it with me. And when I gave them the address, they realized that they had it wrong in the first place. They sent the letter via their secret accomplice. They told me why they kidnapped me. They said that my father was responsible for making the life of the people of the neighborhood hell. He told me that my father approved an industry that poisoned their water supply and killed most of their people. They even had the evidence to prove. All they needed was media to go on and disclose it. But it failed when media decided not to expose the tycoon. So instead, they decided to kidnap me and do it via live television. As they told me this, I realized that they have got the wrong person. And as I told them, they decided to have a decent conversations. They were ready to let me go since they weren't really criminal. All they wanted to do was a right thing. They just didn't know the way to do so. So they decided to come up with a plan where they would push me in front of a media office with all the evidence and record it all live on their media phones and upload it. They also uploaded all the evidence firsthand into the drive that they gave me access and asked me to give it to someone who I can trust. They apologized as they said they will push me when they let me out. And so they did. They pushed me out from the car. It was the same media house that covered my story of kidnapping, and with all the evidence, as I was lying on the floor as they pushed me, people picked me up, and I was comforted in the waiting room. But I got up and straight away gave the copy of evidence to the editor and passed out. Turns out, I was in shock even if I didn't look scared. I woke up in my home, and the first thing I did was turn up the television. And I was glad to see that they decided to run the news, and the tycoon was arrested, and he was none other than the father of my friend who went with me. We never realized he was that rich. Turns out, I was credited for bringing in the evidence, and police did ask and hassle me with questions for the next few days. But I kept the secret with me. They never caught those who kidnapped me, and I never snitched. My friend stopped talking to me as he blamed me for his father's arrest. He eventually left the place and moved away. A month later, I was at the local cake shop where I ordered a pastry to go. The man did not charge me and told me that I can come to the place for a treat anytime. I recognized his voice and nodded as I smiled. And to this day, I am still friends with the baker, the very baker that kidnapped me along with his friends.
Junko Furuta was born in Misato, Saitama Prefecture on January 18, 1971. She lived at home with her parent and her two brothers, one elder and one younger, and could often be found watching her favorite drama series, Tambu, whenever she wasn't studying. During her teenage years, she attended the Yoshio Minama High School and had a part-time job during after-school hours at a plastic molding factory. It was this job that helped her gain enough experience to be offered at an electronics retailer where she planned on working after she graduated from high school. She was also offered the job because of her almost flawless academic performance. She had an extremely high grades and very infrequent absences. She also saved up money from a part-time job so that she could go on a post-graduation celebration trip around the Japanese home islands. But Junko would never get to go on this trip, as she was about to have a hellish encounter with members of the Japanese criminal organization known as Yakuza. On November 25, 1988, a teenage boy named Hiroshi Miyano, joined by his friend Nobuhiro Manuta, was wandering around his hometown village of Masato with mischief on his mind. It was then that they spotted Junko riding her bike home after finishing her shift at the plastic molding factory. Together, they hatched a devious scheme. Nobuhiro suddenly gave chase and kicked Junko off her bike before being chased away by Hiroshi, who acted as the Good Samaritan and offered to walk her home in safety. The whole thing was a ruse disguised to win her trust, and it worked like a charm. Junko accepted the offer and followed Hiroshi who said he knew a shortcut to the neighborhood she lived in. But unbeknownst to her, Hiroshi was leading her to a nearby warehouse, and once he let her inside, he told her he was a member of one of the world's most feared criminal organizations, the Yakuza. Hiroshi then told Junko that if she did not do everything she was told, he would have her killed. He then indecently assaulted her in the warehouse, then again in a nearby hotel, with Junko so terrified that she did not want to raise a peep to anyone she saw as they walked between the two places. While they were at the hotel, Hiroshi called his friends from the telephone there, bragging to them that he had procured his own personal plaything. The group of friends had a history of kidnapping girls and carnally attacking them, so his friends pleaded with him to share his new prize. Sickeningly, Hiroshi agreed. Just before 3 a.m. the following morning, Hiroshi forced Junko to follow him to a local park, where 3 friends of his were waiting for them. The boys went through Junko's belongings, finding that her home address was written on one of her notebooks. Now they had the ultimate leverage over her, claiming that if she disobeyed or tried to escape, a team of Yakuza hitmen would murder her mother, father, and brothers in the family home. Junko was then taken to an empty house owned by Nobuhiro's parents, where each of the boys took turns beating and defiling her. Junko believed every word of the boys' threat and took each beating without complaint, purely out of the love for her family, who by this point are becoming extremely concerned about her absence. On November 27th, Junko's parents contacted the police regarding her disappearance. Word went around town that she was missing, word that soon reached the boys who kidnapped her. They argued over letting her go or killing her and disposing of the body. And so one of the boys came up with an appalling, shrewd plan. With the same threats of having her family killed, they made Junko call her parents by phone, telling them she had run away, but was safe with friends and that the police should stop investigating her whereabouts. Whenever Nobuhiro's parents came over to check on their son, Hiroshi forced Junko to act like his girlfriend. But since Nobuhiro's parents were well aware of Hiroshi's status as a Yakuza and were terrified of him, it wasn't a pretense he had kept up for long. Nobuhiro's brother also seemed to be aware that Junko was being held captive and did absolutely nothing about it out of fear of the Yakuza reprisal. Junko was kept as a Yakuza prisoner for over 40 days and nights, and over the course of this period she was beaten, tortured, indecently assaulted by more than 100 other Yakuza members that Hiroshi had invited over. They starved her, hung her from the ceiling, and used her as a human punching bag. They dropped barbells onto her stomach, forced her to eat live cockroaches, and drink her own urine. She was also forced to dance and sing songs while being beaten before forced to commit numerous lewd acts. On some occasions, she was cut open and objects were inserted into the wounds, some of which included a lit light bulb and ignited fireworks. Junko was burned with cigarettes and lighters, and hot wax was stripped onto her eyelids to seal them shut. The boys also tore off her left nipple with pliers and pierced her breast with sewing needles. Whenever she passed out from the pain, the boys dumped her head in a bucket of cold water that kept her at the ready, keeping her awake so that the torture could continue. By the end of 40 days, Junko had been beaten so hard and for so long that her face was almost unrecognizable. And as a result of the repeated violations, she had become pregnant. 16 days into Junko's ordeal, Horishi invited a boy named Koichi Ihara around to the house. Koichi postured as a tough young prospective Yakuza, but was actually horrified by what he saw, how Junko was being treated. When it was his turn to violate her, Koichi found that he didn't have it in him to commit such an atrocious act. He was mocked by the other boys who bullied him into going through with it, questioning his masculinity and telling him that if he didn't assault her, that he would be kept prisoner too, doomed to suffer similar treatment. Traumatized by what he'd seen and racked with guilt over the things he'd done, Koichi confessed his crimes to his brother as soon as he arrived back at his home. The police were soon contacted, and 2 officers were dispatched to the house where Junko was being kept a prisoner. When they arrived at the address, Hiroshi and Nubahuro played dumb, acting outraged that such an accusation had been made. They even had the gall to invite the officers inside to take a look around, calling their bluff in a way that seemed absolutely outrageous in retrospect. To the police officers, the invitation was all the proof they needed to believe that the 2 boys were telling the truth and that there were no crimes being committed inside the house. If they had bothered to search, Junko would still be alive today, as it is widely accepted that despite some serious mental trauma, she would have recovered from the wounds inflicted on her and gone on to live something of a relatively normal life. But as the month of December rolled around, Junko actually found the courage to sneak downstairs to the telephone to call the police. But to her horror, Hiroshi discovered her trying to summon help, smacking her away from the phone and slamming the headset down into the receiver. When the police dispatcher called back, Hiroshi apologized, informed them that the call was an accident, and told the police not to worry. Hiroshi was furious that Junko had attempted to contact the police and savagely beat her as punishment for the perceived offense. At one point during this particularly savage assault, Hiroshi doused Junko's legs with lighter fluid and set them on fire. Junko was in so much pain that she actually started having a seizure, but the boys believed she was faking it to gain sympathy and set her legs on fire all over again. It was about this point in her captivity that Junko reportedly asked her captors to kill her so that her suffering might be over with, but they mocked her for this request and refused, thinking of more imaginative ways to torture her, such as forcing her to sleep outside at night when temperatures would dip below 0. Somehow, despite being on the verge of death, Junko didn't die of hypothermia. But by the time the torture got that severe, it was having a catastrophic effect on her body. Weeks of abuse had caused Junko to lose control of her bladder and bowels, but she was only beaten harder when she urinated on the floor. She was also rendered incapable of drinking water or consuming food, and would vomit profusely after each attempt. But again, instead of slowing down or attempting medical aid, Hiroshi and his minions only beat her harder from making a mess. Such sustained beatings and torture also had a horrific effect on her personal appearance too. Her face became so swollen that she barely resembled a human being anymore, and her body was so crippled and affected from untreated wounds that she started giving off a sickly, rotting scent that caused Hiroshi and his friends to lose any kind of carnal interest in her. On January 4th, 1989, after a humiliating loss during a game of mahjong, Hiroshi hurried to take his frustrations out on Junko. Taking place over the course of 2 hours. This was perhaps the most brutal, sustained, and cruel beating that she had ever been subjected to, and the details are honestly not worth going into. Given how vile the previous assaults on Junko were, you can imagine how despicable this last one was, and as a result, Junko finally succumbed to her wounds and died later that day. When the boys discovered that she was dead, they wrapped her body in bed sheets and stuffed what remained of her into a travel bag. They then shoved her body into a 55-gallon drum and poured wet concrete into it, driving the drum out into a suburb of Tokyo before dumping it in a secluded area. A few weeks later, on January 23rd, Hiroshi was visited by Japanese police officers and arrested. But as it turns out, this is for an assault on a different girl than Junko, one that had occurred back in December of the previous year. The officers then bluffed Hiroshi into thinking that they knew he committed more serious crimes, and out of the blue, he suddenly confessed to the killing of Junko and told them where they could find her body. Horrified by the impromptu confession, the police drove out to the secluded spot that Hiroshi had described and found the steel drum that contained Junko's body. her hands were so badly burned that she couldn't be identified by her fingerprints. So many of her teeth had been knocked out that the police initially didn't think she could be identified by her dental records. But a partial match turned out to be enough to confirm that the body did in fact belong to the missing Junko Furuta. In light of the fact that they were juveniles at the time of the offense, the identities of all those confirmed were kept a closely guarded secret by the Japanese courts. However, outraged by the severity of the crime, journalists worked hard to uncover their names and subsequently published them in the national newspapers. The reasoning was that no one who could commit such horrific acts of carnal violence deserved to remain anonymous, and that they should be named and shamed for the horrendous things they've done. Not only did Hiroshi Miyano deny that he'd actually murdered Junko, only pleading guilty to the crime of committing bodily injury that resulted in death, but when he was finally convicted of murder in July of 1990, he actually appealed the sentence. Appalled by such a juvenile and cowardly display from Hiroshi, Tokyo's High Court Judge Ryuichi Yanase not only denied the appeal, but gave Hiroshi an additional 3 years on top of his original 17, publicly scolding him for his apparent lack of remorse. During Hiroshi's trial, the High Court judge commented that exceptionally grave and atrocious violence had been inflicted upon the victim, and that Junko Furuta had been murdered so brutally that her soul must be wandering in torment. Upon hearing the details of the brutal assault and torture that ended her life, a spectator in the gallery actually passed out from the shock. Junko's mother also reportedly had a complete mental breakdown when she learned of her daughter's treatment, which required intense psychiatric treatment to overcome. Hiroshi's parents were so ashamed by the whole ordeal that they sold their home and donated the fee of almost $500,000 to Junko's mother and father. Junko's funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989. One of her friends read a memorial piece that stated, "Jun-san, welcome back. I have never dreamed that we would see you again in this way. He must have been in so much pain. There must have been so much suffering. The traditional coat we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the headmaster has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduate together, all of us. Jun-chan, there is no more pain for you now. No more suffering. Please rest in peace." The electronics retailer that was due to give Junko a job upon graduation presented her parents with a uniform that she would have worn during her employment, along with sincere condolences. They placed the uniform in her casket, saying it's what she would have wanted, given how proud she was that she'd secured such a prestigious position at such a young age. What happened to her is something that the Yakuza subject young women to far more regularly than will ever be publicized. You get that the Yakuza are still romanticized in a similar way of how the Italian-American mob had been idealized in the past. We must be cautious not to put criminal organizations on the pedestal, and we must be quick to remember that it might have been our own sisters or daughters that were subjected to such horrendous treatment by men who saw Junko little more than an object that he toyed with, then disposed of. May she and all of the victims of wanton criminal violence obtain the peace and death that was denied to them in life.